Hi everyone, in this video that I would like you to please watch before we do our classroom activity about research questions, I'm going to walk you through some strategies as well as challenges in forming a good solid research question. This is designed to go hand in hand with the work that you're already doing with your clinical and field experiences and your methods work. I want you to use this activity to make meaningful connections between your practices as a teacher and whether or not students are meeting or exceeding learning goals. And long term, I want you to develop a habit of becoming a reflective practitioner. A reflective practitioner is a teacher who continuously reflects on lessons through journals, through notes, through artifacts that they observe, taking into account what the students are producing, the quality of their work, and continuously reflects on how to improve, how to grow. Are students meeting expectations or not? How can I improve my practice? And this includes reflection about their own practices as a teacher, as well as reflection on what they know about how students learn and the research literature related to good, effective teaching practices. This is not a long essay, but I will want it to be divided into sections that include an introduction, very basics about methods. I'll largely give you the methods that you're working with, the findings that you collect, implications for improvement of your own practice, as well as overall conclusions and discussion from the paper. Next, let's talk about the introduction and rationale within your essay. This is going to be very crucial for holding everything together. You want to tell me what you're going to be studying, why you're going to be studying it. If you are studying actual teaching that you yourself designed, why did you design this type of instruction? What were your goals? What were your purposes? What were the learning goals that you wanted the students to have? Even if you didn't design this type of instruction, you should have an understanding of what the teacher was trying to do if you were observing another person's work as part of this study that you're conducting. And very importantly, with the rationale, I want to know, why are you studying this? What are you hoping to learn within this study? Typically speaking, if we were doing this in a more advanced methods course, this would not necessarily include a literature review. This is not an advanced course on research methods, so I'm not having you do a long literature review, but I do want you to have an understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Within your introduction, please discuss the learning goals that you set for the students related to language arts as well as literacy. I want you to have a very clearly defined research question as well as a general thesis that you're making in your case about what the effectiveness was of your instruction and what you're learning from this project. Context matters in research as well as in overall reflective practice. So at the very least, I'll want you to be clear about what grade level you were teaching, number of students in class, students with reading difficulties or other learning difficulties in general, because I know there are privacy issues, linguistic diversity within your class, as well as cultural, ethnic, and racial diversity in your class, and how this affected the planning of your instruction. Also, within your introduction, or what I'm going to call your rationale, we'll walk through that later, I want you to give consideration for your understanding of learning theory that guides your approach to the research question as well as your decisions about teaching. This might be constructivism, behaviorism, we'll talk about that later. But your understanding about how knowledge is formed, your understanding about how students learn, as well as strategies for practice very much will shape how you teach, as well as the decisions that you make about what research to conduct. Now, very important, you will notice that with every class that you ever take with me, if you take more than one classes from me, I integrate basics of learning theory and basics of learning sciences into that class. I believe that it is profoundly important for teachers to have a basic understanding of how students learn with implications for how to teach, and to take that into account as you design instruction, as you implement instruction, and as you reflect on what you can learn about your instruction in order to improve your instruction, whether that is assessment or other forms of reflection. It is okay within your project to focus in on one of the skill areas in the language arts: reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and visually representing. For instance, maybe you can focus in on how students make sense out of visual media, for instance, digital literacy, or you might make sense out of how students are developing their writing skills. You're not limited to reading, even though in this semester I've been focusing largely on tying together disciplinary literacy with English language arts. English studies is a broad and complex field. So again, you're not limited to reading. You might focus in your study on the development of student skill in writing and composition, for instance, or their skill in understanding the structure of language, which gets into linguistics. That being said, if you want to focus on the study of literature, for instance, maybe you teach a unit on Macbeth or on another work of literature or young adult literature, for instance, and you focus in on the meaning making that the students are gaining from this text. And you might even use a particular literary lens, such as feminist literary critique or post-colonial or structuralism, to help you make your case. Within this class, we are going to focus on how literacy is used within the disciplinary area of the English language arts. And so it might be a very good idea, because you're going to be thinking about this a lot in the course anyway, to write a paper that draws strongly on how students are making sense out of their reading skills and developing reading skills as appropriate as they study a work of literature, for instance. Strategies that are appropriate in English language arts disciplinary literacy can differ in some pretty important ways from, let's say, math or science. Because, for instance, reading a poem or reading a play or a novel can differ in some pretty significant ways than, let's say, trying to make sense out of a math word problem. And so there are different strategies we need to take into account for how to teach students. There are also different ways of making sure that we're taking into account cultural, social, interpersonal, and affective, and the emotional, and the artistic aspects of reading as well when we teach. For example, when we teach the English language arts, it's important to help students through explicit instruction as well as practice, make sense out of inferences, symbolism within a story, for instance, comparison and contrast with other stories they might read, as well as placing a story in social, cultural, and historical context. And you might want to consider doing a research study within this semester on ways that students are making sense out of context or making sense out of symbolism. Embedded within this discussion of disciplinary literacy as appropriate for English language arts will be an understanding of what the research says about how students learn to read, as well as implications for how to teach reading. In addition to the traditional ways of teaching disciplinary literacy, there's a sub-branch called critical disciplinary literacy that looks into how we can inquire into meaning making about power systems within the disciplines, and in this case within English language arts. This gets into disrupting and critiquing and analyzing what is common in English language arts, what we take for granted, and how that impacts student learning. We can analyze and critique multiple viewpoints that are present within the text. The viewpoints of different characters, the viewpoints of authors, who has voice versus who doesn't have voice, consideration of socio-political issues as they are found within a story, implications for action that we might take in society, and as well as implications for equity and social justice. So let's get started on how to determine a focused topic as well as a research question. Before you can decide on a research question, first you need to give some thought to the research topic that you want to investigate. For example, what aspect of student learning might you wish to investigate? Are you looking into how students make sense out of their reading, or how students make sense out of their writing? What process goes through their mind as they're involved in reflective thinking, for example? On the other hand, you might want to look into an aspect of your own practices as a teacher that you want to learn more about. For example, how are you going about preparing your lessons and implementing your lessons? How do you go about giving responsive feedback to students? And how are students responding to your feedback? These are topics that can make for interesting research questions. This is why, before we start talking about the research question, I'm first going to have you brainstorm in class about whether you are interested in learning more about student learning or your teaching practice, and what do you want to learn more about, because you will want to focus on one of those two things during your inquiry and then narrow down a research question from those topics. The next step, once you've decided about a topic, is to narrow down a research question. You want to make sure that your question is not too narrow but not too broad. A question that is way too narrow can typically be answered with a yes or no, or maybe looking up a little bit of quick information on even the internet. And it's way too simple to answer. A question that is too broad is something that will take you a long time to answer. You'll have to make it a really complex study, and it cannot really reasonably be answered within a 1 semester 4-page paper. When you participate in the activity during class, I want you to talk from your heart, and I want you to be creative. I will provide you with a brief little sketch of a literary unit that was taught by a former student of mine who was studying under me as a senior in college, a pre-service English teacher. As you consider the details of this unit, I want you to think about a research question that you might want to ask if you were teaching this unit. And then we will focus on research questions in this 30-minute activity during class. This stems from work done by a former student of mine at Clemson University, as she was involved in methods coursework as well as student teaching field experiences when she was a senior in secondary English, and she was teaching high school seniors. This semester, as you know, we are focusing on tying together disciplinary literacy as well as comprehension strategies in with English language arts instruction. So the focus this semester is different than what Angela was focusing on. So that means that you might want to consider looking into a research question tied in with understanding disciplinary literacy strategies or comprehension instruction as you have students study literature, for instance. The experience for Angela was different. In that course, I was focusing on flow theory. Flow is a concept from psychology in which a person is so focused on a meaningful activity that they might lose track of time. It's a little bit similar to being in the zone as an athlete. Students participated in a wide variety of activities. In this course that you're taking from me, we'll especially focus on critical reading strategies. Reading logs can be a very important part of helping students to keep track of the sense they're making out of the play and guiding your own instruction and feedback with the students. These logs were collected at the end of each act. A creative and artistic Macbeth collage was created by the students with details housed on a bulletin board as well as elsewhere in the room. Students also participated in Reader's Theater. We'll learn more about Reader's Theater as we progress through this course. That's one of the disciplinary literacy techniques that I really want you to learn about that can be very applicable to English language arts. As part of this Reader's Theater, students took on roles as actors as they staged scenes, and they analyzed characters in order to stage these scenes. An essay, along with that performance of a play, made up the final culminating grade for the students. The students wrote an essay about the role of evil within the play Macbeth, and of course there were pre-writing exercises throughout this unit in which students were also gathering the ideas toward this essay. In preparation for our activity that we will do, I want you to take a look at the primary as well as secondary research questions that Angela formed for this project. The secondary question is always intended to support the primary question and to provide more detail in answering the primary questions. These are supposed to go hand in hand with each other. I want you to think about whether these questions are too broad, too narrow, what you might have to do in order to investigate these questions. We'll take a look at research methods at another time, but remember, your methods that are appropriate for the question are intended to be determined by the question that you're asking, and you don't want to ask a question that's going to be very difficult for you to address within one semester period of time, within the context of your student teaching experiences that you're doing, and within the limitations of this paper that you've been assigned. So the primary question was, how can I help students get so involved in a literary life as they strive to perform in accord with state and national standards that the students might lose a sense of time and on occasion enter a state of flow? The secondary question was, what aspect of my instruction helped or hindered students to perform in accord with state standards and to experience a state of flow? In advance of the quick write, I want you to give some thought about how the primary question might be either too narrow or too broad. Now, I do not see any risk of this question being too narrow, but if you were to come to me with a question like this, I would have some concerns about whether the question might be too broad and possibly too complex for completion within one semester in the context of your student teaching field experiences and tied in with the activities that you're doing as part of your student teaching. There are also some concepts here that if you were to use these concepts yourself, I would want you to explain to me what you mean by this. For instance, the concept of a literary life. We studied that quite a bit in the class that was taken by Angela that semester, that reflected the idea of students understanding what it means to be young directors, what it means to take on the role of actors, what it means to be an avid engaged reader and an avid engaged writer. And it also was encompassed in the idea of a community of practice, the English classroom as a type of community in which students would have common rules, common expectations, common understandings of what it means to be part of this community, and mutual responsibility for less expert students being guided by more expert students, and each one caring about the other for the sake of both their individual well-being as well as the community well-being within that classroom. That's all taken into account within that term literary life there. Obviously, this unit was designed to be part of meeting state standards. And so, of course, just like with you, I would expect your units of instruction to also meet state and national standards. Now, I'm not teaching you this semester about the concept of flow so much. We're focusing on disciplinary literacy and comprehension strategies combined with good, strong English language arts instruction to include literary analysis. But in her part, she was looking into whether or not students were meeting this sense of flow and possibly entering into a state of flow. It would be very difficult for her to, in a really true psychological, cognitive psychology sense, determine whether students were actually in a state of flow. That's beyond the ability of a pre-service teacher. But the best she could do is make observational notes about circumstances in which she noticed students becoming so focused on their work or so focused on their activities that appeared that they were losing track of time and that they were so purposefully engaged that they were performing at their optimum ability levels. In preparation for activity, Please think ahead of time about what difficulties stand out to you if you were to design a question such as this when it comes to investigating this question. Would you be able to, in your mind, truly make a 4-page paper by the end of this semester and investigate this paper within the time frame that you've got, within the limitations you've got, within your overall work schedule that you have and everything that you're doing during this semester? Would this question be too complex for you? If it stands out as something that would really scare you in terms of being able to answer, then the strategy would be, of course, let's work on narrowing that down. Let's work on not necessarily investigating every single part. Maybe there are some things we can eliminate from this question. I want you to also give some thought ahead of time to difficulties posed by the secondary question that was asked by Angela. Again, the secondary question would be, what aspects of my instruction helped or hindered students to perform in accord with state standards, as well as experience a state of flow? If I were working with you in this course of the semester, I would think about narrowing that to one secondary question instead of two. For instance, focus on either state standards or focus on flow. For a pre-service teacher such as Angela, the best she could do in tracking flow would be her own estimate based upon student behavior about the level of focus and performance that she saw in students and whether students appeared to be so focused that they were losing track of time. It's a little bit easier to track whether her lesson plans are meeting state standards or not. Next, let's talk about different types of research questions as determined by the purpose of your study. Make sure that you remain tightly focused and clear in your purpose as well as in your goals. In this course, we will focus on qualitative inquiry. Possible data collection methods will include observation of your students, analyzing works that they produce. This is called student artifacts, for instance, the essays that they write, analyzing the results of their assessments, for instance, pre-tests and post-tests. Maybe you might do an interest survey. You might keep a journal log of your reflections on your own teaching. And you might give formal as well as informal assessments to track student progress on their work. And then you would analyze these findings. I want you to focus on asking descriptive research questions because the methods we'll be using will be descriptive methods in which you seek to shed light on your teaching methods or shed light on student learning and student behaviors within your classroom. A descriptive question is addressed with, for instance, details about behaviors in your classroom or details about student behaviors in response to certain situations in your classroom or how students responded to your instruction. It's worthwhile for you to take a look at a research question which was descriptive, even though this question is far more complex than what I would ever want you to even remotely consider within the scope of this single course. The student who designed this question was a doctoral student studying under me, working on a dissertation. This doctoral student now holds a PhD in reading. So the goal of this student's study was to describe how linguistic, educational, and personal background impacts the school experiences of English language learners who have had limited formal schooling when they enroll in school. The student who was conducting this research was using both qualitative as well as quantitative methods. Again, in this course, we're only focusing on qualitative. The study included both interviews as well as analysis of artifact student work. So the questions, and you can see how these questions point toward descriptive detail. What are the experiences, describing the experiences, notice, of secondary students with limited or interrupted formal education in the program in which they were participating. And then you can see that there are 3 secondary questions below that that get into the experiences of the students and how to describe these experiences. Notice Key thing that I want you to point out, even though this question is much more complex than I want you to even consider, is that the question was worded in a descriptive way in order to point toward methods that would shed light on descriptive details. So hopefully you enjoyed this presentation. I'm going to work with you closely throughout this course as we link what you know about methods of instruction with your student teaching experiences and this mini research project. For homework, as we prepare for the classroom activity, I want you to focus on the following 2 questions that will guide our discussion. Number 1, what element of your English language arts teaching practice might you want to investigate? This will hopefully pique your curiosity toward an eventual research question. Or maybe you're interested in student learning. What aspect of student learning or student behavior might you wish to investigate? And we'll work together toward narrowing this down into a research question. Take care, everyone.